Good evening and welcome. My name is Bridget Shim.
And I am Laura Miller, and we are the hosts for this evening's Daniel's Talk, For Her Record, Notes on the Work of Blanche Lemco van Ginkel.
We are only two of a number of organizers who've been working on this event and the exhibition that will follow in an unprecedented collaboration between the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto, the Peter Guo-hua School of Architecture at McGill University, and Building Equity in Architecture, Toronto and Canada, otherwise known as BEAT.
Yes. And so not only these organizers, this group of remarkable collaborators, but also the Ontario Association of Architects, the OAA, has become a sponsor for this event and the exhibition to follow. You may know that the OAA recently awarded Blanche Lemco van Ginkel their Lifetime Design Achievement Award in 2020, recognizing, and I'm quoting, an architect with a career-long commitment to the promotion and achievement of architectural design excellence.
Earlier this year, the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, the RAIC, also awarded Blanche Lemco van Ginkel its highest award, the Gold Medal, calling her in their jury comments a living connection to Canadian modernist roots and recognizing her intellectual rigor and cross-disciplinary dialogue. We are very pleased that the RAIC and the OAA are supporting this event and exhibition.
So now we would like to welcome Anne-Marie Adams, professor at McGill University, who is one of the organizers of this event and exhibition. Anne-Marie will give the land acknowledgement for Quebec, and she will be followed by the interim dean of the Daniels faculty, Rob Wright, who will give the land acknowledgement for Ontario.
Thank you very much, Bridget and Laura. McGill University is located on land which has long served as a site of exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. We honor, recognize, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet this evening.
First, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Daniels honors Indigenous people, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to our local elders, including those of the lands from which you are joining us virtually today.
So thank you, Anne-Marie and Rob. We now want to speak a bit about the title of tonight's event, For Her Record, Notes on the Work of Blanche Lemco van Ginkel. As many of you know, Blanche was instrumental in putting together an exhibition at the University of Toronto in the 80s, marking the 100th anniversary of the enrollment of women in Ontario's architecture schools. That exhibit, called For the Record, looked at the careers of 28 women who graduated in a 40-year time period, beginning in 1920 with U of T's Marjorie Hill and extending till 1960.
This summer, we found in a storage area in the Daniels faculty 2 plaques created by Blanche for the exhibition. While you will hear about the impact of For the Record, the exhibition, and later the book edited by Joan Grierson, also called For the Record, the first women in Canadian architecture, which was expanded to include those outside of Ontario schools, it is an overview. And we want to simply describe what we saw on those plaques. Not only the names of the 28 women, which is expected, but everyone, and we mean everyone, large and small, who contributed in some way to this exhibition. The researchers, the donors, the students who spent hours helping to arrange the show, or those who found time to put press type on exhibit boards in that pre-digital time.
So we mentioned this to point out that foremost, what we've learned about Blanche during our work on this project is that among her many qualities, qualities that shaped her insights into design and planning and informed her acute reading of the nuances and complexities of social and cultural conditions within the projects that she and Sandy van Ginkel undertook, both of which you'll hear more about tonight from others. What we saw was an ability to see within a complex situation, almost like a pontillus, that is, to see and importantly recognize the individuals who were part of a particular scene.
The end of the text in one plaque, of which for the record states, and this is here, we're quoting from Blanche herself, for the record shows the effects of time and circumstance on the professional lives of these women. Although economic conditions apply equally to men, it may be noted that many of these women, particularly the early graduates, were not taken seriously in their choice of career and had to struggle to gain any kind of recognition.
And continuing this quote, Blanche goes on to say, these 28 separate experiences make it possible to gain an overview of what changes were evolving in the professional world of these women architects. This perspective, or the power of the other eye, is helpful in assessing the record historically, and it may also give a sense of the changes yet to come, end quote.
Tonight, we bring again the power of another eye to look at Blanche's work, and we hope it is fitting that in For Her Record, we have attempted to adopt Blanche's way of seeing, creating a composite record, one that has been constructed by so many people from diverse places and speaking in different moments in her career and her work. We hope too that this work may, in Blanche's words, give a sense of the changes yet to come.
Okay, so before we introduce tonight's speakers, we'd like to tell you about the order of events for the evening, very briefly. We'll begin with Joseph Hillel and a clip from City Dreamers, which we're very much looking forward to. And then we'll alternate between speakers and a series of 3 short videos from many, many contributors. Before each video, you'll see a list of who contributed to that particular video. At the end, following our 3 speakers and 3 videos, 3 is magic, we'll ask our speakers for any comments that they may have, and if time, we would love to open up to the audience and the chat for questions. Then finally, we'll end with a toast to Blanche Lemco van Ginkel. And we're giving you a heads up on this now so that you might grab a glass and something refreshing in advance, as we have. Also, we'd like to say that if for any reason you're having problems with your internet connection, we've posted links in the event chat to YouTube where you can see the video of this event directly streamed.
Now we would like to introduce our speakers, and we are very pleased that they are part of For Her Record. Their full biographies are on our website, so we will only say a few words and really get on to the main part of our program. For Phyllis Lambert, architecture is a public concern. Architect, author, scholar, curator, conservationist, activist, critic of architecture and urbanism, she is the founding director emeritus of the Canadian Centre for Architecture, which she founded in 1979 as an international research center and museum. Through its projects based on research, visiting scholars, events, exhibitions, publications, and an outstanding collection, the CCA has created a new discourse in the architecture of the 21st century. In addition, Phyllis has been a personal friend of Blanche van Ginkel's for decades.
İpek Mehmetoğlu is a PhD candidate at McGill University Peter Guo-hua School of Architecture, completing her dissertation on the role of travel and mobility in women architects' life stories in the mid-20th century. She holds a Master of Arts in Architectural History and Bachelor of Architecture from the Department of Architecture in Middle East Technical University, Ankara. And she is a Fonds de Recherche du Québec scholarship recipient.
Mary McLeod is a professor of architecture at Columbia University, where she teaches architectural history and theory. Her research and publications have focused on the history of the modern movement and on contemporary architecture theory, examining issues concerning the connections between architecture and politics. She is the co-editor of Architecture Criticism Ideology and Architecture Reproduction, and is the editor and contributor to the book Charlotte Perriand, An Art of Living. Presently, she is co-editing a website for the Beverly Willis Architectural Foundation, on pioneering American women architects. She has received several fellowships and awards, including a Fulbright Fellowship, NEH Award, the Arnold Brunner Award, as well as grants from the New York Council of the Arts and the Graham Foundation.
And last, Joseph Hillel is a filmmaker and director whose most recent documentary is City Dreamers, a film about our changing urban environment, and three trailblazing women architects and a trailblazing landscape architect, Phyllis Lambert, Blanche Lemco van Ginkel, Denise Scott Brown, and Cornelia Oberlander, who have been working, observing, and thinking about the transformations shaping the cities of today and tomorrow for over 70 years. His films have won numerous awards nationally and internationally, and have been shown at festivals also around the world. And we are so pleased that Joseph has selected an excerpt from City Dreamers to share with us tonight. So Joseph.
Bonjour, hi. So I'm Joseph Hillel. I'm very pleased to be part of that event amongst those extraordinaire panel speakers. And doing a film is very challenging because I have to make a lot of choices to select different part because you cannot show everything. So I'm very happy to participate in this event that will show the work of Blanche in a more exhaustive way. So until I have the chance to hear your presentations and to see this exhibit, allow me to present a little excerpt of the film.
This is Laura. Apparently we have no sound on the video clip, so we're going to ask our friends in IT to restart that, please, and hopefully we'll get that working properly. So our apologies.
And thank you for your patience.
Yes.
What is it? Huh? Yes.
You mean, shall I talk? Is that?
What is that? Is that a model?
It's a model of the roof of the Habitation à Marseille, on which I worked in the Le Corbusier atelier. It's a famous building. Well, I'm sorry, it's famous in architecture quarters at least. This extraordinary good friend who is also an architect hosted my 90th birthday party recently. And he had his office make that to go on top of the birthday cake. So the birthday cake it wasn't the whole height of the building, which would have been excessive, but he ordered a cake that sort of represented the top 4 or 5 floors and then put this on top of it. And then he removed it and we ate the cake.
Well, then eastbound on the Queen Elizabeth Way, busy southbound to Dixie, eastbound Gardner Expressway, heavy.
My mother's sister, after the war, by chance, married a Frenchman. I went to visit her at Easter. She said, why don't you come and stay in Paris for a while? And I said, well, you know, I would have to work because I don't have funds to stay here. But my Uncle Georges said, well, what you do is go and offer to work for somebody as a stagiaire, and then they'll offer you a job. I went to the Le Corbusier office. There was an empty desk and there was work to do, and they gave me something to draw. And Le Corbusier came in, he came to my desk, checked what I was doing, and they came back and offered me a job. So I stayed there.
A paid job.
A paid job, a real job, not a stagiaire. What I was doing was the plum job in the office, which was to work on the toit terrasse of the Unité, which was under construction. I, in effect, was designing the whole of the roof.
What do you think of the Unité as a piece of architecture?
I think it's a magnificent piece of architecture and one of the most important contemporary buildings in the world. The great difference between this and other apartment houses is that it is not simply an apartment house, but a vertical neighborhood of a little over 300 families. It's like a series of little houses stacked one on top of the other. At the entrance to the building is Le Modulor, the measure of the symbolic man, whose dimensions determine the design of the building and give it human scale. You can take a very good walk around the roof, and you get a view of the mountains on the one side and the sea on the other. It's a building which has imagination, wonder. It's more than just a roof and the walls that provide the basic elements of shelter. Certainly it houses people, and it does it quite well. It has its faults, but it goes much beyond that. It appeals to the spirit of man.
I think this may be an important point in the teaching of architecture is when a dream's important. Now, a dream, by definition, is not realistic. Perhaps one should talk about aspirations rather than dreams, because in the back of your mind, if you understand materials, or if you understand society and human relationships, you know that it should be possible to do something. There were people who were considered dreamers who had aspirations for society which were never realized during their lifetime. Now, I wouldn't call those people dreamers in that way out sense, you see. We do refer to them as dreamers. In architecture, I would credit those realistic dreamers who are like Da Vinci. Because He understood the principles of flight, for instance,
Yes.
even though he couldn't put them into effect. It's very difficult sometimes to make the distinction between them and the way out dreamers who are just out of thin air. A lot of the people who are considered imaginative today, and it's not dreaming for a purpose. There's enough in the reality of the world to provide the inspiration for dreams which are somehow one day realizable.
So now we're moving to our first speaker, Phyllis Lambert.
Hi, this is wonderful to be able to speak about Blanche. I will talk about some of the projects that she did in Montreal. And from the time they were there, 57 to 77, 20 years, I guess. And these were a few of the 150 projects that they did in that time. So Blanche and Sandy and I became great friends when they went to Toronto. They moved to Toronto, of course, because she was going to teach there. And I had only they'd been to Montreal in 57, and I only came back to Montreal in 73. So I guess we weren't too much in contact. But, you know, in Toronto, I used to bed down at their place whenever I visited. And Blanche and I, next please, went on to next. I'm supposed to say next, and you're supposed to move it.
Yeah, great.
Oh, thank you. And we went on wonderful adventures together sometimes, even when we were, excuse me, my voice is gone. Even in what was I going to say? Adventurous trips that were washed out, rained out. Oh yes, and I wanted to say, Blanche made the most wonderful bread. And of course, I always had it when I went there, but she also always sent it to me for Christmas. It was wonderful. We didn't see each other much in Montreal, as I mentioned, but we worked on many of the same projects, but they were avant-garde. They were years ahead of just pretty what happened in most cases. The work that they did had such a huge impact on Montreal. Referring to an early plan of theirs, Blanche wrote, most significant to me is that Montreal does not have an elevated expressway along Commissioner Street in La Commune, and has, as a consequence, preserved Old Montreal, no Gardner Expressway. In quoting Blanche, I left out her attribution of this to Sandy, of this great vision, the triumph of the utmost importance. I am saying that she said it was only due to Sandy alone. Blanche said, this brings up the question of who did what. Certainly Sandy's Dutch painter's eyes and saw quality, planners, not painter. Well, he was a wonderful sculptor. Sandy's Dutch planner's eyes saw the qualities of Montreal's 17th and 18th century city, which was actually in very, very much neglected. And as a European living in historical cities, he understood the need to search for the documents and then the great maps of the historical maps. But Blanche's accomplishments deny her claim. They worked together. Blanche van Ginkel remembers from childhood Brenda van Ginkel, remembers their constant talk about architecture at dinner and everywhere. Blanche wrote, and it was Blanche who wrote the program for Expo 67. The human essence of the place and the pragmatic parts of it. Okay, this is what she was saying. It must have a worthy setting. The exhibition should be epitomized. This is Old Montreal. We'll get to the expo in a minute. The exhibition should be epitomize Montreal, its environment, its natural features, being the St. Lawrence and the mountain. Very, very few people remember this, understood this. The viewpoint, to be able to see the site and entering it, was so tremendous that you could see two bridges as you came in, so that you could see the site and you could see the mountain, you could see the city, and of course, vice versa, going from them, you could see down. So those bridges were, of course, the Jacques Cartier and the Champlain bridges. And had to be strategically located with respect to the major networks of parking, of highways and public transit, and then, of course, the issues of parking and lodging and visiting the city. But the development of the site should be of benefit to the city and its needs. The total development of the metropolis can be influenced and the face of the city changed, said Blanche. Now, this map this drawing is a quick drawing in somebody's in Sandy's office, and you notice that this is the site, I believe, and here's Old Montreal. Well, here's Old Montreal, sort of, and this was the highway, I guess, that was projected instead of going right through Old Montreal. And so the idea was to have, they felt very strongly you had to have the new project, the city, improve the local situation of the city, the areas that were no longer viable or outdated or not used or the needed changing. You know, some of that came from their SIAP training, I think, but also, next please. So this shows the site that they had. This is Point St. Charles over here. And these are various other parts. This is Old Montreal and the case. And these are two different sites. So they had it on various sites, and you see them very much. This is great. It's not, it's movement of traffic and things like that. But what is so interesting about it, and of course, the site wasn't there, it was moved to the islands, but the whole principles that they had applied to how you would do a new project for a great international exhibition, but also it advanced many many areas of Montreal that weren't touched for years. For example, Point St. Charles, which is down at the bottom, is now under discussion with huge amount of public input. And we don't know what the results are. There are problems that haven't been resolved. Next, please. Okay, now here they were working for the MCM, which is the Montreal City, the Montreal Citizens Movement that was opposing Mayor Drapeau, who, you know, there were problems with Mayor Drapeau, many of them. And so they actually made this study of the movement. Next, please. This was the last one was, of course, what they proposed. This was, of course, the first, it got back and forth. This is, you know, all cloche. And the other was actually a much better thing. You see, this is Old Montreal down here. Okay, I think I'm way behind on my notes here. Oh, yeah, this is okay, fine. Next, please. Now, this is a plan for Victoria Square. Now, Victoria Square, this is a detail of that, obviously, as you can see. And Victoria Square is way out to the further north. But this shows so much what the situation was when they were doing. This is, of course, Marie-Anne-de-Mont, the Cathedral of Montreal. And this is the new hotel that was under construction. And this is where the Place Bonaventure, and this is where Place Bonaventure would eventually go. And this was so, you see all these places that are sort of rubbed out. Of course, these are the great squares, these great green spaces in Montreal. But this was such an important thing in Montreal. And what would be built in many of the places, for example, Place Bonaventure, at the square near Victoria Square, would be the Caisse de Dépôt de Placement that incorporated all existing patrimonial buildings, covered part of the east-west throughway, and fashioned the new Place Riopelle, and at the same time faced the new convention hall. proposed environment of last Victoria in Montreal with special references to University Street and Victoria Square. So these are the kind of things that they were working with. And I'll go on to the, oh yes, so they did a study for canality, and I don't have a map, a plan of that. But it was commissioned by the city in order to investigate the planning and possibilities, as that was the time when the International Seaway of 1954 to 1959 had made the Lachine Canal obsolete as a means of moving goods and also as a site for industry. So again, this was dealing with all the major issues of the time. And one of the studies that Blanche undertook, Blanche and Sadie, on their own account, is a long-range plan to preserve and expand Mount Royal. Next, please. Yeah, great. Park, in which a citizens' movement was involved. I mean, not the citizens, the citizens, people had been fighting for years, and actually it was 60 years later that finally the mountain was classified as a place of historical importance, and so that you can't develop it anymore. But there were all sorts of inroads that were being made onto it, and people, there's already some development. And this on the right, you see the kind of the methodology. This is a map of the 1880s at the time that the park was being planned, and it shows the sites that existed that were owned by various people that had to be, of course, bought up in order to create the park. So the whole methodology is wonderful. Next, please. Ooh, how did that get there? Oh, I guess it's fine. Okay. I didn't think I'd gotten here so fast. Okay, as noted earlier, Blanche and Sandy devoted much of their time to research and design projects that were generated and paid for by them, and sometimes with other people who would join them pro bono. And this is a study it's interesting because it's a very small scale. It's one block and mountain. Those who know Montreal, that's whole Renfrew on the corner there. And so this was the whole interior of the rule. This was before, this was just a plan of what existed there. Next, please. And this is what part of the plan that they had. This is, I think, phase one of the plan. But you see this sort of line here. This was actually, they made over this area, they made a double height room which to be used for a restaurant, I think. But the idea was that all these people would have various, that you could use, because these buildings are so deep, that you could cut them down. That's what they did on the next stage. And so this part would belong to this part, to the alley. And here they actually made a kind of big areaway to it. Now this is very interesting because it's a block next to which the Musée des Beaux-Arts finally developed their new project by Safdie. But the point is that it was a project that, for a particular site, yes, but it was something that was a question of how do you densify commercial areas in the city. And this was, of course, this is something people in Toronto have been doing for housing in a very interesting way. And this is a very, very interesting example. And next, please. Now, this is a truck survey. And this shows the types of trucks. I'm sorry, the length of stay, small, medium, and large times of staying, and what time of day they were there, and and which buildings they were, they needed to service. Now, showing this because this is one of the myriad of studies they did for this particular project. It wasn't just a very pretty inner court, inner alleyway that was to be developed into something that was lively and people could live in. This is very much Blanche's sense of things, I think. But it was something that you had to have all these basic studies made for. And I'm just going to leave this on the screen because I don't have any other images to show you. But I just wanted to mention in closing about I have something to say in a minute, but it was a vastly different scale that involved a huge number of technical studies. Was the airport for Montreal, not the airport, the international airport. Well, as you all know, there was the, what was the name of the place?
Dorval or...
No, the other one.
The other one, Mirabel.
Mirabel, merci. And Mirabel was a great project, technically very interesting. They didn't have anything to do with the technical part of it, but what they had to do with was whether you should have, you needed expansion. Montreal was growing, Expo had sort of helped in this, and the question was whether you should actually add to Dorval, which is the actual airport now, or whether you should make it some other site, which eventually, of course, the Trudeau government did. And of course, it never worked out very well because the airlines just didn't find it convenient. But however, and it was a very, very interesting project. But the number of studies are absolutely incredible. The detail of course, how you move bags, how you move people. There have been many. I'm sorry I don't have a list here, but it was just absolutely fantastic. And during a time of all this was happening, the many projects they were doing, and when they were in Montreal, of course, Blanche was teaching. And surely that interacted with these projects that they were doing, and the work of the office, of course. The attitudes and the principles of the methodology and the concepts of the pragmatism are all things that are so amazing. And I can't tell you how impressed I am by the thoroughness of their work. And it's very exciting to me that this conference is taking place. It's just the beginning of discovery of their work, which is the projects I think we'll hear tonight that nobody's ever probably heard of. And the fact is that what was I going to say? Well, the fact is that the number, the approach to the projects, their prescience, they were always a sort of thinking ahead of what was happening, and the humane and pragmatism at the same time, city dreamers of reality, and these projects say so much about their work, but they also say so much about the history of Canada during that time. So I'm waiting to see the rest of this program. Thank you very much.
For your talk.
I love the notion of humane pragmatism. It's a really beautiful idea that's evident in their work. So we're going to go now. We'll hopefully have time at the end for some questions and comments, but we'll go next to the first video compilation that we put together from various contributors. And you can see their names here. So this is the first group of notes for her record.
And this is the first of three.
Yes, first of three.
So again, as Laura said at the beginning, we'll have this short video, which is a compilation, And then we'll have EPEC, who's our next live speaker, our next set of videos, and then Mary McLeod, and our last set of videos. So just so you understand the pacing of the event.
Hi again, it's Laura, and the sound is an issue. So hopefully we can overcome this difficulty. We'll start again, and thanks for your patience again.
She's inspiring to me also as someone who has given this history, the history of women in architecture in Canada, a foothold in our institutional memory by creating space for it in archives and galleries and libraries. Blanche spoke very openly about her experience as a woman in architecture. She wrote articles like her piece, Slowly and Surely and Somewhat Painfully, more or less, the history of women in architecture in Canada, which was published in the Journal of the Society for the Study of Architecture in Canada. And she helped to organize the exhibit, For the Record, the first woman in Canadian architecture at the University of Toronto. These are important milestones, I think, not just for women in architecture, but also for the profession, because they help to flesh out how architects work in relation to broader social contexts. What I have learned from Blanche's experience and the experience of other women who follow her in this work is that writing and speaking the history of women in architecture is important not only for the lists of firsts that it generates. Writing and speaking the history of women in architecture also helps to foster relationships between women in academia and professional practice. And it helps to cultivate networks that are personal as well as professional.
We could ask the question, is her name a household name? And this was a question that I was thinking about in 2017 when I was preparing a course, an undergraduate course on feminism, art history, and architectural history, in which I would have about 80 students. Their assignment was to come up with a very short, accessible film about their chosen architect or artist. The intent here was to grow the visibility of these artists and architects, and to my delight, one group chose to work on Blanche Lemco van Ginkel. So Julia Tartaglia, Fatima Raymond, and Evelyn Richardson Haughey produced what I think is a very engaging and accessible short film.
Born in London, England in 1923, Blanche Lemco van Ginkel emigrated to Canada in 1938. Lemko van Ginkel came to live in Montreal, where she completed a bachelor's degree in architecture at McGill University in 1945. She then, in 1948, went to Paris to work at the Atelier Le Corbusier, where she was responsible for both the forms of the ventilator and the decoration of the Provençal tiles on the nursery of the Unité d'Habitation. In 1950, she graduated from Harvard University with a master's degree in city planning. In 1951, she was the first woman to gain a teaching position at the University of Pennsylvania and taught there until 1957, when she and her husband, Sandy van Ginkel, founded Van Ginkel Associates, a city planning and architecture firm here in Montreal.
Lemko van Ginkel and her husband did the original master planning for Expo 67, and as principal of Van Ginkel Associates, Blanche participated in a study of the circulation patterns of downtown Montreal and the early rehabilitation of Old Montreal. The Van Ginkels also designed the 250-acre Bowring Park in St. John's, Lemko van Ginkel received the Massey Medal in 1964 for the park's boldly cantilevered concrete footbridge. Blanche Lemco van Ginkel also accomplished many firsts for women in North America, including her deanship at the University of Toronto in the Faculty of Architecture from 1980 to 1982, where she had been working since 1977, having pursued architecture because she felt a calling to serve society. Lemko van Ginkel has actively promoted an appreciation for the work of Canadian women artists through her publications. At 90 years old, Lemko van Ginkel received an honorary doctorate from McGill University. She is now 93 years old and resides in Toronto.
Most of you probably know that Blanche is among the earliest women admitted to the School of Architecture at McGill. And I chose this stunning cover of the RAIC Journal and a page of student work which features her project for a dance studio. Just below it is a project by Catherine Chard, who is the first woman admitted to the school. And both Blanche and Catherine were part of a cohort of early women who were admitted immediately after the retirement of the long-serving director, Ramsay Traquair, who actively kept women and minorities out of the School of Architecture. Blanche's presence in Montreal was really path-breaking for so many of us. That even though Quebec was among the last places in the Western world to accept women architects, the effect of those early architects was really accelerated.
First of all, it really started at Harvard in the 40s. I was in architecture and she was in city planning, and we both graduated in 1950. Actually, I think in those days, there was a good sense of collaboration between city planning and architecture, and there were collaboratives. In fact, she prides herself in pointing out that when she was a member of a collaborative team, they got a better grade than the one I was on.
I met Blanche and Sandy 60 years ago, a long time. And while our friendship and relationship has spanned decades, I want to focus on the beginning of that relationship 60 years ago, when Sandy and Blanche settled in Montreal, being exposed to this new world, the work of Team 10, the kind of exploration into urban design, a term I just became introduced to, the extraordinary discussions we had about the form and shape of cities, about the essence of urbanism, that were part of that extraordinary year, working with Blanche and Sandy at their office, at the basement in the house in Westmount. It was enriching. It was like opening the door to a whole world.
Architecture's always been a particularly tough profession for women. So many other professions had their glass ceilings shattered a long time ago. But architecture's glass ceiling is still being chipped away at. What has been accomplished in this country has a lot to do with the notorious BVG. Not RBG, BVG. AKA Blanche van Ginkel, who, like RBG, is a giant in her field, a true pioneer who mentored and was a model for so many female architects in the profession over many, many decades. Through her work, her accomplishments, her accolades, and her wisdom, she showed everyone that women were not only up to the job, but in her case, far more capable than most. She did this gently and with enormous grace, but always with conviction and determination. It is hard to describe what a novelty that was. A woman as a leader in a program with not a single other woman as a professor or teacher in the entire school. But almost immediately, I experienced how much better the school became. She created an openness that allowed for differing views and experimentation in a way that had been missing from the institution for a very long time.
The first time I came across Blanche's influence on the school, I was doing research towards the organization of the exhibition celebrating the 125th anniversary of the school. And I was in one of those mysterious basement rooms in 230 College, may have been a former dark room, and came across a treasure trove of old lecture and exhibition posters, including a poster for the Centennial exhibition and event that Blanche had organized during her time at the school. And I found a file folder filled with notes in her beautiful loopy handwriting about the planning that went into the event. And I thought, I have to meet this woman. So as you probably know, she was in charge of the exhibitions and public programming at the school for over a decade. I think one of my favorite quotes was one that we eventually used in the exhibition, where she talks about the lectures and exhibitions, saying that they were, and this is a quote, "in a way, an opening of the doors and windows of the school to let all kinds of breezes in, and a way to get a broader view of what was going on," unquote. And just love that idea. I think it's so central to what she did in those areas during her time, and is also, I think, still the spirit of the school, where the public programming and the exhibitions are seen as extensions of, but not replications of, the pedagogy of the school.
So whatever I am and whatever I achieved has its foundation and its roots in the ideas, in the concepts, in the values that Blanche and Sandy gave me at the most critical moment in my life, for which I will always be deeply grateful.
Blanche, you gave us confidence, hope, and excitement about the world ahead of us. And you were right. It is a deeply meaningful calling.
Okay, so we want to apologize for the lack of coordination between lips and video. We're trying to work on that, but thank you to all of our first contributors in that video so much. We're going to now hear from IPEC, and I think you're doing your own slides, yes?
Yes.
Okay, looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you.
See my slides? And can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you to our moderators, Bridget Shim and Laura Miller, and to all the organization team. I'm a PhD candidate at McGill University School of Architecture, and I will be finishing my dissertation this academic year. My research is on the role of mobility in the lives and practices of women architects and urban planners. I study a group of pioneering women from Canada, the United States, and England in the mid-20th century, namely Blanche Lemco van Ginkel, Mary Emery, Jean Walbridge, Jacqueline Tyrrett, Denise Scott Brown, and Alison Smithson. I'm curious to see how, as designers, travelers, authors, educators, and critics, women brought issues on architecture and mobility to broad audiences. My research develops in 5 themes. I examine women's stories with cars and automobility. I analyze their narratives and in which they explored ways of seeing on the move. I look at the travel of knowledge that they instigated through various research projects. And I analyze urban mobility projects and architectures of travel that they designed. And finally, I look at their transnational design exchanges in foreign contexts. I think Lemko van Ginkel is a perfect case in this discussion, as mobility constituted a major theme in her professional life and personal story. Significantly, she traveled to Europe after her graduation from McGill in 1945 and worked in offices in England and France, famously in Le Corbusier's office. But I'm also very intrigued by her engagement in mobility on a theoretical level and also in design as an architect and planner. Mobility, enabling movement people, was something to which she was dedicated in collaboration with her husband and professional partner, Sandy Van Ginkel. Circulation projects, street designs, public transits and roads, airports, cars, pedestrian movements, architectures of travel and tourism, and so on. And the ways in which she tackled this issue in her writing was very significant. She was very progressive. I moved to Canada from Turkey to start my PhD at McGill University in 2014. This was around the time Lemko van Ginkel was awarded an honorary degree of doctorate by the Faculty of Engineering. I knew I wanted to do something about mobility and travel and women, and I wanted to learn more about the Canadian context. I knew close to nothing. As I read and heard of some details of her life and work, I was intrigued. I was sitting in the archives at the CCA where her material is so well documented, and what I had in mind was to look for movement, mobility, travel, anything to do with it in the folders in the Van Ginkel Associates collection. I started threading my way through traces, and in the end, it turned out that this was not a difficult task. With each folder I opened, I found more than I expected. Fascinating examples of their work in various scales and forms from all around the world. A number of circulation projects in the United States and Canada, airport studies for Montreal, as well as Jamaica, Venezuela, and Brazil, an aviation center in Sri Lanka, among others. The same was true of her writing, as she was a prolific critic and author. I decided to work on a chapter on cars and women, and there she was, editing a Canadian art issue on cars, or comparing the batteries of electric vehicles and the Canadian architect. I was working on circulation and communities and neighborhoods. Elsewhere, she was writing, I quote, "Circulation is the very life of a city. Without movement, the city cannot exist." At the same time, she was seeking for inclusive plans with an elaborate sensibility towards architectural heritage. And this was happening in the face of the period's culture of demolition for urban renewal. CCA folders include her numerous interviews too. These documents allow us to see her more personal views on the link between mobility and urban landscapes. One is from the Montreal Star. Her approach to auto-age architecture, for example, was not one-sided. She loved the car, yet she critically examined its role in society and architecture. In another interview in the Gazette, she was telling how terrified she was as a young women planner at the time to tell older men what to do with their city. Indeed, she was a trailblazer and an activist. But in the way I see her, she urged to create dialogues without assuming universal knowledge attained through age, gender, or professional authority. Her work on mobility was what attracted me to her, something that shaped my image of her. Being an enabler of people's movements was something that defined her, in my opinion. Mobility formed an important part of her professional identity, perception, and practice. And her relationship with architectural mobility definitely sets an example of how, by designing and writing, women carved out new roles for themselves within the profession. Mobility was a modern issue. It defined a period. Indeed, there was a global frenzy with auto and aero mobility, machines, and technologies of movement in the post-war period. And Lemko van Ginkel was an agent of change. She was a pioneer with her critical insights, intellectual expertise, and design work. And it has been a very exciting journey for me to be doing this research on her. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ipek, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. We're going to go now to our second of the three videos, and hopefully we'll sync a little bit better on this round.
And a wonderful lineup of videos for you.
Yes. It truly is a Zoom world. Just when we think we've mastered it, it comes back to give us our comeuppance a little bit. So thanks for your patience.
I first encountered Blanche van Ginkel in fall 1987, when I started my professional bachelor's degree at the Faculty of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at the University of Toronto. I was rushing up the entrance stairs to the main hall, and she was striding towards the grand staircase leading to the second floor. Petite in stature, she was elegantly dressed, and she commanded respect just by her demeanor. When I asked someone who she was, I was told she was a professor and a former dean. This impressed me profoundly, as there were next to no female presence on the teaching faculty. We women made up perhaps 20% of the student body. It was only in 1994, as a young graduate student enrolled at McGill University, however, that I would discover the extent to which Blanche van Ginkel had been a pivotal pioneer in the Canadian architectural scene.
Well, first of all, we could start with her very low voice. She was never projecting. You had to come to her to listen very carefully.
There's a very interesting story behind Blanche entering the Atelier Le Corbusier in Paris. She arrived in the French capital in 1948 in the age of 25 years. It was after her graduation at the McGill School of Architecture and before gaining her degree in city planning at Harvard University. When she went to Le Corbusier's studio, she was prepared to become an unpaid stagiaire, as everybody else. At first, she was asked to draw several drawings, and shortly afterwards, Le Corbusier offered her a paid job. What it tells us about Blanche? There had to be something very special about those drawings. And what it tells us about Le Corbusier? He had a special sense for recognizing talents and extraordinary skills of young people. And despite some of the well-known stories about him discriminating women, he was capable of appreciating their professional qualities.
We created the Philadelphia group for SIAM, which I think it was Blanche's idea for the name, Group for Architectural Investigation. We were a very collegial group, and we undertook to send something of our work to the Aix-en-Provence SIAM conference. I think it was 1963. And we also presented work at the 1967 conference in Dubrovnik. Those are the two SIAM conferences which we were related to. And the Philadelphia group, we analyzed, in the first go-round, we analyzed, using the SIAM grid, we analyzed the new community of Levittown that was under construction in Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, and did an analysis using the nomenclature and the colors and so forth of the SIAM grid. And then in the 67 conference, we did a proposed redesign using essentially the same quantitative figures, but giving it a different social form and physical form.
Bonjour, je voudrais rendre hommage à Blanche Lemco van Ginkel, la saluer et très sincèrement la remercier pour tout le travail qu'elle a pu faire au cours de sa longue carrière, mais tout particulièrement dans les années 50-60, alors qu'il s'agissait d'éviter que le Vieux-Montréal, cet endroit absolument formidable par son architecture, son histoire et son identité de quartier fondateur de la métropole historique du Canada, ne soit détruit au service d'une autoroute une installation de mobilité, de transport, un grand ouvrage de génie civil. Or, il faut imaginer que dans les années 50-60, on prévoyait ce genre d'équipement en front de mer à travers le Vieux-Montréal. Cette perte aurait été gigantesque et le meilleur geste que pouvait poser non seulement une architecte et une urbaniste qu'elle est encore, n'était pas de réaliser quelque chose, mais de réaliser la valeur de ce qui existait déjà. C'est un pas gigantesque qu'elle nous a permis d'accomplir. On attend encore à Montréal un monument à leur mémoire de ces sauveurs de la cité. Merci et félicitations encore, Blanche Lemco van Ginkel.
Bonjour, my name is Joseph Hillel. I'm a filmmaker, director of the film City Dreamers. I'm presently in Montreal on Le Mont-Royal. I came here because it's one aspect of Blanche's achievement in Montreal that I could not include, unfortunately, in the film. So I want to express all my gratitude to Blanche, not only to helping me to start that film. It was after meeting with you that I decided that I would do City Dreamers, and also want to thank you for your work on the Mont Royal that I visit almost every day.
They were pioneering preservationists, valuing the old city for its ancient street structure and buildings. They made recommendations for rehabilitation, which resulted in the declaration of Old Montreal as a protected historic site in 1964.
I met Sandy Van Ginkel because he and Blanche created something called the Ginkel van for John Lindsay, the mayor of New York. And the Ginkel van was a very small bus built on a funny platform, which they got from Oldsmobile actually, but it was a platform that worked, and I'd read about it, and I'm walking along this the Maisonneuve Street in Montreal, and I see this bus in miniature in the lobby of a building. I have no idea where it's come from or anything like that, but it's covered with canvas that's painted like the bus would be in mine. And I'm really intrigued, so I go into the building and work my way to the office of Van Ginkel Associates. And I say, look, I want to talk to somebody about this bus because I'm really interested in it. And so Sandy appears. And we talk about the bus, and we talk about a bunch of other stuff. And eventually I say, look, I got to go home. Why don't you come for dinner? Or come at least for a drink anyway. So he meets Jean, and we talk, and eventually Blanche turns up, I think, there, maybe another night. Anyway, we get together, and we all think we're lovely. And we're enthusiastic. I'm particularly enthusiastic about the bus. And of course, I'm enthusiastic about their enthusiasm.
To my astonishment, that there had been only one president from a Canadian School of Architecture in over a century of ACSA's history. That president was Blanche Lemco van Ginkel. She served in 1986 and 1987 when she was at the University of Toronto.
I was first introduced to Blanche Lemco van Ginkel in my undergrad at Dalhousie when I was asked to write a paper on her bridge in Bowring Park, Newfoundland. I was most excited about this project, not only because I had the chance to research a female architect, but because I also got to research a piece of architecture that was in my hometown. I actually had the opportunity to continue researching her at my most recent work term this summer at Heritage Newfoundland. I was working on the heritage designation of the first modernist structure or building in Newfoundland and Labrador, and that happened to be Blanche's footbridge in Bowring Park. This was so exciting for me, and I actually got to interview Blanche and talk to her about her career and her time in Newfoundland, designing the bridge, interacting with people from Newfoundland. I actually had the chance to tell her what an impact her work has been
on me and the people of Newfoundland, and it was a wonderful chance to speak with her and an amazing opportunity to talk to one of the most inspiring female architects. In hindsight, her aura undoubtedly, unconsciously left a lasting impression on me. Women can indeed succeed in this field, whether taking up professional practice, pursuing scholarly endeavor, or training the next generation of architects. Despite many advances, we still struggle to place women in leadership positions in architecture. Female students make up about 2/3 of the student body, if not more, at the Université Laval School of Architecture in Quebec City, where I teach. Yet they remain in the minority at many architectural firms in the province, notwithstanding the progressive policies some offices have instituted to ensure parity amongst male and female employees. Talking to her was such a privilege, and she is one of the biggest inspirations for me as I start my career as a young female architect.
Oh, no sound.
I did press it, but it didn't stick. We're back live now, and there's a few things before we hear from Mary. The video links have been posted in the chat for those of you that are having difficulty, as we certainly are up here with the syncing of audio and visual. You can stream on YouTube, or you can watch them later with the proper calibration. So we hope that you do that. And the other reminder is simply that for anyone in the audience, if you'd like to post a question to the chat, we'll be monitoring that, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end. So thank you so much. And now Mary.
Okay. Okay, just a sec. No, sorry. First, I just want to say, first, is the sound working? Is everything going okay? Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I'm not, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, I just first want to say how honored I am to be part of this wonderful event and have a chance to express my profound admiration of Blanche. Many thanks to Anne-Marie and the Daniel School for inviting me. And I also want to thank Anne-Marie and Eric Mumford for their help with some images, so my debts are big. I don't know Blanche well, but I've been very fortunate to have a few encounters, most by mail or email. So this little talk will be quite personal and episodic. I first met Blanche, let's see, why is it not progressing? I first met Blanche at a symposium on Charlotte Perriand that I organized at Columbia University in 1998. And I think it was Val Woods, the widow of Shadrach Woods, who suggested that I invite Blanche and another woman, Maria Fenio-McVitie, to the event. Both knew Charlotte Perriand from their time working together on the Unité d'Habitation in Marseille, which we've heard about, while they were in Le Corbusier's atelier in the late 1940s. The suggestion may have come from Charlotte herself via Roger Aujan, who also worked on the Unité with Edith Schreiber, who would soon become his wife. And much to my amazement and delight, Blanche came from Canada, all the way from Canada to New York for the day-long event. She was so gracious and supportive. And of course, I was extremely grateful for her support. When the book I edited, there's the day-long event that she very graciously sat through. And when I finally got this book finished in 2003, I sent Blanche a copy. And just like her, and I've heard other stories along the same lines, I received a lovely handwritten note thanking me for the book. And clearly, she had actually read parts of it from the nature of the note. Our next encounter wasn't until a decade later. I was working on an essay on architectural education for a book edited by Joan Achman, Architecture School. She doesn't feature in her own essay. She does prominently in Anne-Marie Adams. I was trying to figure out who were the first women to be full-time teachers and deans in North America, as well as to learn more about the history of the University of Toronto. When I interviewed George Baird about the school, he spoke admiringly about all that Blanche had done for the architecture program and the school more generally, and how she had put it back together again. Just a sec, my voice is gone. Apparently, there had been lots of exhilarating experimentation in the late 60s and early 70s that had seriously begun to falter by the time of her arrival. And she helped establish relations with both the profession and the university that were at a new low. Blanche's answers to my queries about her own academic positions amused me. First saying that it wasn't that Anne-Marie's territory, and of course it was. And then somehow, after answering carefully all my queries, almost always shifting the exchange to her dear friend, Sasha Nowicki, which he would continue to do in almost all our intermittent emails. What came out again and again in these exchanges was her admiration and deep friendship with Sasha, who was hired at the same time as Blanche at the University of Pennsylvania. In fact, it was almost as if she turned every question about her own role as an educator into an occasion to praise Sasha, who she described as extraordinary, surviving World War II and hiding as a child, and then after the tragic early death of her husband, caring for a young boy and baby, all while becoming one of the leading educators at Penn. She mentioned to me more than once that Dean Holmes Perkins referred to Sasha as, quote, the best teacher of first year there ever was, and that numerous students would attest to her superiority as a teacher. She also mentioned to me, talked to me about her incredible graphic work, calling it very beautiful. And here is a note I got after sending her some images of Sasha at an event at Penn. She was about 10 years older than Blanche, and apparently their friendship was just a very deep and close one. But what also came out in these exchanges was her respect and deep appreciation of other women educators at the time. In this email, she describes being sent by George Holmes Perkins, the dean at Penn, to meet Catherine Bauer, with whom she had a long, interesting conversation about housing policy, and whom she liked so much that she wanted her husband, Sandy, later to meet her. She refers to Bauer's professional acumen and calls her, quote, a great person. And in another tantalizing email, Blanche describes Jacqueline Tyrwhitt, or Jackie, as she calls her, and says that as an architectural critic, she was as perspicacious, I always mispronounce it, as any, and then declares that she was a great teacher. I found out later talking to EPEC that they were in fact quite good friends, and that Jackie, or Jacqueline Tyrwhitt, was a kind of mentor to Blanche, introducing her to CM. After hearing her remarks, it made total sense to me that she would later go on to curate in 1986 the first exhibition of women architects in Canada, and in general to have an incredible role supporting women architects. The next series of emails with her concerned a website that I'd been co-editing with Victoria Rosner, Pioneering Women of American Architecture. This had to do with women architects who were educated and began careers before the women's liberation movement of the 60s and 70s. It was never quite clear to me whether the sponsor, the Beverly Willis Architectural Foundation, meant American to only be US or not. But I decided Blanche had to be in it. And I took an executive decision, as they say. And of course, the person to write that profile was Anne-Marie, and she decided to collaborate with Tanya Southcote, whom you heard of earlier in the little video clip. But after their first draft, we realized there was still more details to be had, especially about Blanche's time working with Bob Geddes on the Philadelphia chapter of CM and her time in Le Corbusier's atelier. Geddes, who was the dean at Princeton when I was a student, had once mentioned to me how much he valued and enjoyed collaborating with Blanche, and I urged Anne-Marie and Tanya to contact him, and hence the recorded phone call, which has been part of today's celebration. And here's an image of the project they did with Sasha Nowicki and George Quayles, study of Levittown, Pennsylvania, about 2 decades, I might add, before Venturi and Scott Brown's Signs of Life exhibition, which examined things like Levittown. I'm dying to find images of the 56 board, so if anyone does, please tell me. And also Bob Geddes doesn't know where they are. And much to my delight, Blanche wrote the following email about her time in 1948 in Le Corbusier's atelier. Unlike most of the young people building models or designing apartment interiors with Charlotte Perriand, she was given, as you've heard already, the task of working on the roof terrace. This email from her gives a rare glimpse of her own role and how much Le Corbusier trusted her in the creation of what, in my view, is one of the great spaces of 20th century architecture. Here you see her comment about the ventilators, where apparently Le Corbusier encouraged her not to be quite such a purist. Originally, she had articulated all 3 fans. He did appreciate that she splayed the ventilator, a feature that would remain in the final scheme. And here are her comments about the tiles on the nursery structure. Apparently, he spread out a pile of Provençal tiles on her desk and said, figure it out. And here, her role in the children's play area and the explanation for the high parapet to eliminate the immediate landscape and emphasize the Alpes Maritimes in the distance. And I just want to show you the end result of these communications was the marvelous profile of Blanche that Anne-Marie and Tanya wrote. And they quote part of this email. And I would encourage all of you to read it for a quick summary of many of Blanche's accomplishments. I'd like to conclude, here's another image of that profile. I'd like to conclude with one more detail, a kind of footnote, if you will. A couple of weeks ago, I happened to mention to the architectural historian, Robin Middleton, that I was going to be speaking at this event. Robin, who was technical editor of AD in the late 1960s, mentioned to me another accomplishment of Blanche, and he was very eager that I report it. Something we hadn't included on the website entry, and one that I haven't seen in all the articles paying homage to her this year. I might have missed something. And that is her seminal role in AD's special issue of Expo 1967. Robin immediately volunteered what a superb job Blanche did, assembling all the materials and saying that she was essentially responsible for this iconic issue of AD. Anyone who knows Robin knows that he's not one to praise readily, in fact, quite the contrary. And it seems to me from this little anecdote that we still have lots to discover about this remarkable woman. And I feel so fortunate that I've had a chance for these intermittent but very special encounters with her. Thank you. Okay, stop.
Appreciate the kind of personal touch. We are now going to go to our third video session, and we'll hopefully have no technical glitches.
By the time she was 28 years old, she had graduated as both an architect and a planner and done that in separate settings. And she said she started a practice. She said she called it Blanche van Ginkel, architect and planner. And she had great difficulty with that because people didn't think the two went together. But what was fascinating about Blanche is that she was very involved in the spectrum of the arts and the sciences that are involved in creating cities and buildings. And she worked at all those scales and in all those ways. So she was certainly an architect, certainly a planner, partly an engineer, an anthropologist, a teacher, professor. So she was a very ambidextrous, and I admired that. And in fact, I modeled my office setup partly on that experience of meeting her and of understanding what had gone on in the world between 1900 and 1950.
Blanche had a stellar career as an urban planner. After completing her architecture degree at McGill in 1945, Blanche worked in the noted modernist planner Eugene Falludi on the first comprehensive plans for Windsor, Ontario and Regina. This is her 1946 master plan for Regina. The plan included residential expansion designed as neighborhood units and a civic center, the site for Regina's new city hall. Blanche also worked as a planner for CMHC in 1949 between her time in Le Corbusier's office and her Master of City Planning degree from Harvard. While at CMHC, she prepared the agency's handbook on urban mapping, which set the cartographic language for Canadian planning. Blanche's contribution to planning Meadowvale, west of Toronto, is not as well known as her Montreal and New York work. This area is now home to thousands of residents and employees.
From 1966 to 68, Blanche and Daniel van Ginkel, her husband, worked on the relocation of the indigenous community of South Indian Lake and its 500 peoples. At that time, it was the second largest community of the Nisichwasa Cree Nation. The proposal was part of the Nelson River hydroelectric project, which included a series of dams and hydroelectric power plants. Blanche's research in particular was led by social aspirations. So when investigated today, these materials demonstrate how Blanche and Daniel van Ginkel pushed the limits of design for the indigenous communities of the north of Canada. They show how they developed a project that constituted a strong critique of modernist models and attitudes. The proposal also displays Blanche's insistence on the significance of indigenous participation in design processes and the refusal of assessing people and cultures against stereotyped settler colonialist images of native traditions. So Blanche's research provides clues of a different and overlooked modernism that, although still operating as an instrument of state authority, they work for the government, while it followed pioneering ideas and it presented an alternative way of practice that need further investigation.
Seeing the work of Blanche Lemco, Sandy van Ginkel and their team, it struck me how many projects are reflecting an unusual lateral way of thinking about architecture, design and the city. A lot of the work is not architecture or planning as it is commonly understood. Even when they dealt with buildings and natural and urban environments, they would do so without relying on the conventional tools of design like plans and sections. And what I really admire is the free and conceptual way of thinking behind these works, which are not restrained by conventional assumptions of what an architect or planner should do. I believe that among the achievements of Blanche Lemco and Sandy van Ginkel, this highly conceptual approach is perhaps still a bit underappreciated. For me at least, it was one of the largest revelations while studying their archival material. It's also striking to see that the wide variety of design projects are all driven by a similar systematic logic. An illustration of this can be found in the issue of Canadian Art from 1962, which was guest edited by Blanche Lemco.
So one of the other interesting things about Blanche and Sandy's work in the Mackenzie Delta was the way in which they drew the project. For example, maybe you can see this drawing here of a plan looking at the different communities along the Mackenzie Delta and where might housing encampments for the operations of the pipeline be set up in such a way that it has the least amount of conflict with communities already there. And this drawing has this quality almost of a Cedric Price Pottery's Think Belt. It's basically a logistical drawing studying the impact of infrastructure and looking at it both from the perspective of above and its wider regional influence, but also looking at the way in which it impacts people on the ground.
And she worked on the master plan of Expo 67, and we actually found evidence in her archives that she came up with the theme Terre des Hommes for Expo. But in my experience as an archival researcher, the thing that struck me most particularly was her work on Old Montreal, because it's very well documented in the archives, but not so much in the public domain or in the collective memory of Montreal's inhabitants. And there are their own drawings, of course, which they did after the survey, and also detailed isometric drawings they did of Old Montreal city blocks, which are particularly beautiful. And one of my favorite pieces of archival items in her archives there are these pouches of old photo negatives, which I like to think that she closed them in the late 50s, early 60s, and we opened them over 6 years later. And so these are serial photos of Saint-Jacques Street that Blanche and Sandy took of all the building facades on Saint-Jacques to really show what kind of architecture was at stake by risk of demolition in Old Montreal. So eventually the city agreed to Blanche and Sandy's report, and Old Montreal was saved. So this is her immense contribution to the preservation of such a historical part of the city. And in such a project that she did relatively at the beginning of her career, we see this really wonderful and intelligent way of combining architecture and urban planning and conservation with real care and confrontational analysis in line with her principles as an architect, and an inventive solution by the end. So I think the very extensive range of her later work and career too shows this kind of consistency, design as an attitude of continuous ethical engagement with the city.
So in 1981, while she was still the dean, she contacted the Institute for Urban Design in New York to organize the fourth International Conference on Urban Design, which was going to be held in October 1982. So she already stepped down when it actually happened as a dean, but she was very much involved, of course. And what you see in these papers, and that I like a lot, that you kind of see, you can kind of reconstruct how it came about. One of the nicest surprises in this small mass of paper is the correspondence of Blanche with the National Ballet of Canada because she wanted to organize a ballet for the conference as a kind of an, let's say, festive ending for the conference. She asked them if they could do a ballet for two people on the kinetic city or urban environments. And they were very interested to do this. So you see back and forth the correspondence between her and the ballet, the National Ballet of Canada. And you see also the correspondence about what it was going to cost, $15,000. I don't think it happened, and purely because of financial reasons. But in a way it happened because it is part of this archive. So you can imagine that there was a ballet, even if there wasn't. I think that's very beautiful of the collection of these papers and the fact that she kept those.
There was a dinner attended by David Cronenberg and Margaret Atwood and various very articulate people, and I had invited Blanche, and it was culture. And of course we were largely talking about the high arts. So Blanche, when Blanche's turn came to speak, she said something that I think was key to who she is. She said to the others, for me, culture is not just the high arts. Culture, we were at a table and we were eating, and she said, culture is the knife and fork you're using. Culture is the plate you're using. Culture is the texture of life. And that was Blanche. The texture of life, but played with such care and meticulous discretion. And we were so touched and impressed with that.
And here we have an example of a woman who led, but maybe was personifying the best of what we are as a community. And we get to celebrate that through her. And what better way to do it than through a person like Blanche van Ginkel. One other thing that I find really interesting for me as a child of immigrants, my parents came from South Korea in 1968. I came along a couple of years later. I don't have a real oral connection with my grandparents. They've since passed, and I got great stories from them. But maybe I wondered the other day, someone like Blanche, who is like someone from my grandparents' generation, I got to sit down and hunker down and get all these stories from her, as if she might have been something like a grandmother figure to me. And I don't think that's a stretch to say that that mattered to her as well. I think there are times where we need to get that double generation spread to be able to kind of really hear those stories. And I wonder if that's going to impact me, as I want to tell stories not for the people just after me in terms of age, but those that are a generation or so after me. I think therein lies the real truths about what it takes to make architecture last. And so it's more than just bricks and mortar. It's more than just the great spaces, the public and the private spaces that we all try to craft, but it's the way we engage them and the way we cultivate the people and the culture within it to last. And that's something that Blanche truly, whether she knew it or not, truly was a crafts person at the highest level.
Okay, so we've reached the end of our video saga. And we're hoping, even though we're a bit over our scheduled time, that we might ask our presenters if they had any kind of closing comments or thoughts to share with us. So Phyllis, Joseph, Ipek, and Mary, if you'd like, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, my video is stopped. Okay.
Mary.
I couldn't get it to work. You guys had turned it off or something?
I don't know.
I think we can see you now, Mary.
We see you now, Mary.
Okay. So what an amazing array of images, stories. I feel like we just, like Phyllis said, it's sort of the beginning of unraveling a very rich, full life and a full career. for me, very moving seeing all these wonderful video clips and hearing the various speakers and the amazing film clip as well. So I'm just very grateful. Thank you.
Great. Phyllis, we can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Okay? Yes.
Yeah,
Now we can hear you.
Yes.
Yes, wonderful.
No, I just think that the scope of the work and the, you know, as I said, there, like in those years that they were in Montreal, they did 150 projects. That's almost a project. Let's see, they were there for 20 years. So it was just amazing. And I think that tonight that people have insisted and said about the conceptual aspect of the work. And of course, that, as I had said, with the pragmatism, the two going together was just, I think, amazing. And I think we've only skimmed the surface of things. You know, CCA was very fortunate to have their archives, and it is so very rich. And so I believe, well, I know that we're planning to do a book on with Concordia on major architects, and Blanche is one of them. And so, you know, all the contributions that will come forth, I think it's wonderful. We'll learn so much, as I said, about what Canada was at that time, and what, thinking conceptually in terms of what is needed to be done and how to do it. Thank you. Thank you for Blanche. This is what I meant. Blanche.
Yes.
Congratulations.
So now we need to move on. Oh yes, Ipek, yep. Or Joseph.
Ipek or Joseph, is there anything you'd like to?
Thank you. I wanted to thank you too for organizing this great event, which allows us to see the breadth of all the research, not only just the research that's going on, and as a student carrying research on Lemko van Ginkel's work and life, I guess sometimes as a student you focus a lot on one aspect, and with these kinds of events, it allows us to see how many researches are going on in parallel, and also just to hear the something that you really miss while doing research is the personal voices of people to whom she touched, and in ways in which she touched their lives is also it's fascinating. And so I wanted to thank you for creating this great event and for inviting me to. Thank you.
Yes, our pleasure. Joseph.
Well, I will second Ipek. It was a great event. Thank you very much. I feel like a tourist here because I think I'm the only person who's not an architect, but it was super interesting. Thank you very much for organizing this.
But you know, one thing I didn't say was about Blanche. Blanche was she did films. You know, she was an amazing person. And people talked about those wonderful journals that she edited. I looked at some of them at CCA. You know, she had a great eye. The images that she showed were just always terrific. You know, I don't know, but she was great. And she, of course, she was the person who created the Order of Architects in Quebec, in the province of Quebec. And she, I'm missing some things that she did, of course, but she was a very richly, but very modest person, my goodness. You know, she never talked about herself when we were together, never. And lots of the things she did, I never knew. I never started learning. So anyway, I just wanted to add those things. Again, thank you, Blanche.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our presenters this evening. We're going to give you a round of applause.
We'd like to applaud too.
Yes, for organizing such an amazing thing.
So we have a few more things that we need to just let you know about.
In our wrap up, yes.
Yeah, there is a bibliography that has been compiled by Anne-Marie Adams and Zainab El-Rawi. And I think that if we haven't, we will soon post, and you can see here the Google Drive link. And it is an amazing resource for those of you interested in learning more about Blanche and people that wrote about Blanche and things that she wrote and so forth. And we'll continue to add to this as we put together our exhibition after the new year as well. So,
so now we've really reached near the end of our evening, and we have a number of people to thank. First of all, we wanted to say that this whole event has been a really remarkable and enriching collaboration. We have not really attempted here to provide a comprehensive summary of Blanche Lemco van Ginkel's career or work. Instead, we've sought to assemble a range of voices, and we do not see this as a completed project, but just a beginning. Our next work here is to assemble the thoughts and ideas you have sampled tonight into a longer online exhibition in the new year. What we have found gratifying is the multi-generational perspective presented, and those still awaiting to be uncovered. The fact that Blanche's archives are actually situated in the CCA is just a truly remarkable resource for current and future scholars.
So in particular, we'd like to thank Anne-Marie Adams of McGill because she has provided remarkable leadership on this project, and she has shared with us her deep knowledge and understanding of her work in the area of women in architecture in Canada. So thank you, Anne-Marie.
And we'd like to thank Betsy Williamson of BEAT Toronto. BEAT stands for Building Equity in Architecture in Toronto, which is really an advocacy group for design excellence and equity across Canada. She's been assisted by Vinitha Sivanthas, and it's really important that the next generation of practicing female architects are listening to this and are part of the conversation.
Yes. We've also been supported in our work by Zainab El-Rawi and Jeannie Lim, and we thank you. And lastly, or not quite lastly, but most especially and warmly, we want to thank Brenda van Ginkel, Blanche's daughter, who has provided guidance and direction to all of us, and she's generously shared her personal collection of photographs and made them available for us to use in this event and in the videos, as well as in the upcoming exhibition. So thank you so much, Brenda.
So we also wanted to thank each and every one of the video contributors, and they are so many. And in a way, each of those video contributors gave so much of their time and their thoughtful thinking to share some of that with all of us. So I just wanted to send a truly heartfelt thanks to each and every one of you. We also want to thank Robert Wright, the interim dean of the Daniels faculty, as well as Martin Bressani, director of the Peter Guo-hua Fu School of Architecture at McGill University. It's really great that these two great universities are actually collaborating on a project that could not have been realized without working together.
And we're getting close to the end of our thanks, but we want to remember to thank also Mason White, the Daniels Events Chair, and Mauricio Quiros, the Daniels Exhibition Chair, as well as Nini Brode, who's the Manager of External Relations and Outreach, and Aidan Cowling. And a special thanks to Daniels IT, Melissa Montgomery and Renee Lear. And lastly, to Media Circle, to Juan Malvestiti and Alessandro Vaccaro, who helped us with the 3 videos that we made.
So finally, we would really like to together propose a toast to Blanche Lemco van Ginkel. And so if you can, at home or wherever you are, please raise a glass to honor a remarkable individual, to Blanche, and using once more her own words, especially as we near the end of 2020, to the changes yet to come, Cheers.
To Blanche.
To Blanche.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So thank you all for your patience, and we really hope that it's been an engaging evening, and we just have a lot of things to be thankful for. And this will be posted. People can look at it again, and then also look out for the future exhibition, which will be longer and more comprehensive. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.